So we just went over present tense keywords and preterite tense keywords. So they can definitely jump over from one side to the other depending on context, but this is based on you writing your own sentences. We're not going to make the difference or this distinction between present and preterite anymore. It's good to know the difference, but we're only going to focus on preterite tense. Past tense that we've been talking about. We'll learn the other past tense later. So any of the rules that we learned about present tense being irregular, all those rules are out the window for preterite tense irregular. Okay. Everything that we talked about with present tense, preterite tense regular verbs is all on this slide. Your regular conjugations, no matter what, will always have an accent on the yo form and the LAO stead form. So that's for anything to do with regular verbs. Always make sure those accents are very, very clear. And then there are examples of AR verbs and then examples of ER and IR verbs. Okay, so that's for regular verbs. You also have to watch out for your caracterizar verbs that only change in the yo form. So have to make sure those changes take place. For the irregulars, the ones that we covered so far are id and sed, which share the same box. Remember that you don't have to know why yet, but basically the sed verb isn't used very much in the preterite past tense. It's used more in the imperfect past tense, which we will get to. For now, just know that id and sed, even though they have two very different meanings, the verb id, to go, and the verb sed, is to be. So one of our to be's, the other to be verb, we will come back to and talk more about later in the semester when we're ready for those. Dat and vid, remember those two together. They both have no accents, and use your R, ER, and IR verb endings with no accents. Hacer is the one that has that different beginning, HIC and HIZ. Again, no accents because they're different endings. The only one that has accents so far are irregulars is the verb leer. Okay. So, preterite obviously has already happened. Just a couple of examples here, and just to refresh your memory that the direct object pronouns that we talked about last chapter will keep coming up. One way for you to tell that, for example, the la in this example has a direct object pronoun with it is that the la and the AMOS don't go together. So we can always tell what our subject is by our verb. In this case, we called, past tense, her. So it can the la can refer to anything that is feminine and singular that's receiving the call. So those will keep coming up throughout the semester. I just want you to recognize the direct object pronouns. He lived. So in this case, you can have, when you're writing your own sentences, you can put the actual subject there to be included with your verb, but why do you not always need it? Mais compré, fine, and me sente, fine, without the accent or the subject actually being there. The verb already tells you. The ending of the verb, the E right there, tells me that that can only be the yo form for preterite past tense AR verbs. So you don't need the subject if it's already implied by the verb.
So there's no such thing as preterite present tense?
No, two different tenses. And then your keywords will start showing up as well with the past tense. So when we run into a verb that we haven't done yet, for example, the tuvimos on this one, go back. Tuvimos here is a verb that we haven't learned yet. We will come back and talk more about that. So an example of hablar, hablé, hablaste, habló, hablamos, hablaron. Take away your AR, add your AR endings, and then make sure you have very clear accent on the yo form that el usted. Same thing for your ER, IR. With AR verbs, also watch out for your caracterizar verbs. So if a verb ends in CAR, change to QUE accent. GAR verbs to GUE accent. And ZAD verbs to CE. So you're dropping the ZAR and only replacing with CE accent on all of those because those are all the yo forms. Okay. Only for the yo form do you change those, so you have to make sure that you have those changes that take place there. Er and ir verbs, there's an example of each. Box is exactly the same. There's no difference between er and ir verbs. Same exact box, same exact endings, accents clearly for anything to do with regular verbs, yo form, and the el usted form. Okay. Sed and id share the same box. We will come back and talk more about why sed isn't really used in this past tense. It's used in the imperfect past tense. But for now, just use the fui, fuiste, fue, fuimos, fueron as either went or was. We'll learn the other verb to be, estar, as a separate chapter. It does something different in the past tense, the preterite past tense. Then dar and ver, we have, I say to always remember those two together because they, they have the same endings. So dar and ver both use er, ir endings with no accents. Hacer is a lovely weird verb that has the weird beginning and different endings. Normally where we would have accents, we don't because they're ar endings with no accents. Hacer is going to have a whole bunch more verbs that are going to be more like it. We're not ready to do those yet. We're only focusing on a few verbs for now, and then we'll come back and talk more about what changes for the rest of them later in the semester. 3 vowels in a row will happen with a lot of different verbs. The only one that I want you to know for now is the verb leer. So leer will change once you add your endings to it, only on the bottom two forms, from I to Y when you have those 3 vowels in a row. Know that there are other verbs that also do that. For now, you don't have to know them. There are more verbs that are I to Y changes. One verb that we've talked about or that we've run into is the verb esquiar, where the yo or the el usted form ends up being esquillo. So the U, the I, and the O, yes, I know are 3 vowels. But when we have QU and GU together in Spanish, we never hear that U sound. So they're seen as combination letters, and you don't make the stem change here. So you're going to learn later that this only applies to ER and IR verbs. So only ER and IR verbs have this I to Y change. So esquiar wouldn't fall under that category of verbs. So when we do more later, we'll come back to that. Okay. So last chapter we talked about reflexive verbs. We did the whole entire chart. You have a whole different list of verbs that you can use for your project for this time. Even though we did them in the present tense last time, all you have to do is take those same verbs, use your pronouns, your reflexive pronouns stay exactly the same. Me, te, se, nos, and se. All you're doing now is changing the verb instead of using present tense. For example, if we have the verb, this is not working with me today. If we have the verb dormirse, come on. There we go. Dormirse, what does it mean?
I go to sleep.
Okay, so I put myself to sleep. The reflexive part there tells us that we need a reflexive pronoun. Both in the present and the preterite, we're going to have a reflexive pronoun. That will stay exactly the same. What you're going to do is, when you're looking at dormir, that's what you're going to change to present or preterite, depending on what you want to do. If you're using present tense, you're going to make a UE change, and you're going to use a present tense ending. But if you want to do that same verb in the preterite, all you're doing is now looking at the se, taking care of it, making it the yo form for your reflexive pronoun. Then do dormir as a regular conjugation. Technically, dormir has an extra change, just like the verb leer, it changes on the bottom two. We're not going to get to those later. Anything that you use for your project that we haven't talked about won't be counted against you unless it's one of the 5, technically 6 irregulars or irregular verbs that we talked about. So your reflexive verbs, the changes that they made in the present tense, those stem changes, do not take place in the preterite. Reflexive verbs can also be irregular and reflexive. We're going to come back and talk more about these verbs, but this one is just like the verb leer. It has a vowel right before the AR, ER, IR. Technically, this only applies to ER, IR verbs that are I to Y changes. Okay, so we'll come back and talk more about those. But here's just if we were to take an example of an exercise that we did last chapter. Instead of making all those stem changes that we had to remember in the present tense, you no longer have to worry about those. Now you're just doing regular conjugations. Take away your AR, ER, IR, add your endings, you're done. But then use your reflexive pronouns to make it the reflexive verb. You won't have reflexives tomorrow. You'll just have regular and the 5, technically 6 irregulars that we talked about. So, but reflexives I'm mentioning so that if you want to use them for your project, you can, so you know what to do with them with the verbs that we did last chapter. All right, let's do this. What would it be we sang? Do we need to say nosotros?
No.
So we can just say cantamos. She ate. Ending is 2 letters, all past tense, preterite, comió. Accent on the O. Okay, they lived. Plural, vivieron. Good. Okay, I was. It technically could also be a stud in this case. That's why the sed is there to tell you that for now, we haven't done a stud yet. It's a whole different version of irregular. But for now, sed. For the yo form, fui. Good. You familiar or informal? Gave. One of your irregulars for this chapter. One of the 5, technically 6. So that is the verb. And what's irregular about it? Diste. Diste. Good. And then I played an instrument. Tocar is the verb. Toqué. It's always the e sound. Okay. If I were to do, instead of playing an instrument, if I played a game, what would that be? It would still be that one of those cargar verbs that have the change CAR verb and GAR verb. Okay. And what is he read? Leyó. Accent on the end, and you have to make sure you remember that it makes an I to Y change. Okay. All right. Couple of things. This is all together what we talked about this chapter. So you have regular preterite conjugations. You have examples of AR verbs, examples of ER, IR. You have dar and ver, which use those endings with no accents. You have ir and ser, which share the same box. You have hacer, and you have leer. Okay. So in a nutshell, here's your chapter. The same presentation is on my website, and I uploaded it to your Edmodo. So you can pull that up and look at it at any time. And so if it's not these verbs right here, ir and ser, which share the same box, dar, ver, hacer, all those have no accents. Leer is the only irregular that has an accent and ends up having extra accents. If it's not one of those, treat it like a regular verb. Okay. You will have to know meanings of your same list of verbs that you had from Spanish 1. So if you haven't already learned your meanings of your AR, ER, IR verbs, now's a good time. Your quiz is going to have regular and irregular verbs mixed together. You'll have to know meanings of your regular ones, and you'll have to know that these are the, again, it depends if you count sit and eat as separate verbs or together since they're the same box. So 5, technically 6 verbs there to remember. No accents to worry about for the irregulars except for leer. And all the leer boxes have accents except for leyeron. Okay? And I gave you this document right here on your Edmodo, and it gives you a quick overview of just the the irregular verbs that we're focusing on for this chapter. Hacer, leer, ir, ser, dar, and ver, all together in one place.